Step into Paranormal M, where eerie events unfold. Subscribe and enable notifications to catch every spine-chilling tale. Brace yourself for an unforgettable journey. The Crying Noises. In 2019, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was out of nowhere, but I couldn't move and I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak, and I was hearing very, very strange noises on the other side of my wall, which is shared with the living room. I played it off as sleep paralysis because after a while the noises stopped. I could move again. I can only describe the noises as wailing from maybe a woman or a child. I really thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but then my mom's door opened, who's right next to mine. She checked up on her dog who was sleeping in the hall. Our dog shook himself awake. I hear his collar jingle as he shook. And this also made me try to hold on to that thought that I was the only one that heard this noise, because my dog barks at every single thing, and yet he slept through a whole crying ordeal. I was restless for a little while until I was able to go back to bed. The next morning, my mom's boyfriend at the time left for work. My mom was driving me to school when she told me that her and her boyfriend heard weird crying sounds out in the living room. I told her that I had heard the same thing, but that I didn't get up to see what it could have been, because I thought it was just sleep paralysis. This happened again 2 more nights before it completely stopped. I still don't understand what could have caused this sound. A weird thing that happened days after the noises stopped was that my mom was alerted that somebody she knew had passed. And after the news was shared with her, we never heard those specific noises again. Familiar footsteps. In January of 2012, my aunt passed away unexpectedly. Her sister-in-law lived in the apartment next door, and that night my aunt's daughter, my cousin, and I were sleeping over. We were woken up by her dad, my uncle, banging on the door to tell us about the news. After my aunt passed, they quickly began the process of moving out. But one day my cousin asked if I could go inside with her to wait. That was while she was getting something from her room. I said yes, and we went inside. She went through the living room and down the hall to her room. I waited by the door, and I looked around the empty space. That was the living room, and out of nowhere, I hear my aunt's bedroom door open and then close. Her footsteps, the bathroom door opening, and then the bathroom door shutting. I stood there completely stunned and waited silently for my cousin to come back to me. When she came back out of the living room, I quickly told her what happened, and she believed me. But she said that she hadn't heard it, and her bedroom is right next to her mom's. We left the apartment, and I never went in there again, but also I never felt my aunt's presence afterwards either. During that time, I had lost another aunt to cancer 2 months before this. She also lived in the same apartment complex, so I spent a lot of time in between those 3 homes and those 3 apartments. I know for certain that those footprints were my aunt. I had those sounds memorized. I hope she's okay and I wasn't scared, but I sure miss her. The Shadow People. Between 2016 and 2019, there was tons of activity in my home. And during this time, my mom had a boyfriend who lived with us. My room used to have Christmas lights up, and in the early years, when I was 15 and 16, my mom had a rule that I had to sleep with the door open, so I wouldn't stay up all night on my phone without her catching me. I would wake up between 5:30 and 6 to get ready for school, be out of the door by 7. Usually, my mom's boyfriend would be long gone by then, but one day I woke up just in time to see him pass by the hall. He's about 6'1", 6'2". Nothing seemed unusual about it except he had a dark mass following behind him. I could see this as a shadow. It was against the wall. kind of weird because, his actual shadow was on the floor in front of him. I remember feeling pure dread, so I closed my eyes. I tried not to think about it anymore. I never saw that shadow again, though. That wasn't the only shadow person I had in my room. I usually would unplug my lights when it was time to go to school to save energy, but sometimes I just forget. Once I came home after school, and during dinner my mom's boyfriend said something along the lines of, "Oh, I saw you sitting on your bed this morning. You must have gotten to school really late, huh?" I looked at him in confusion and I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He looked at me a bit stunned. He asked me what time I had left, and I said 7 a.m. like always. He looked scared and told me that at around 7:20 a.m. he was rushing past my room because he was running late. He saw a figure who was sitting on the edge of the bed and assumed it was me. Well, since my lights were still on and, left the house. That definitely freaked me out, and I couldn't sleep comfortably in my room after that for weeks. The scariest experience I've ever had. I work a very early morning schedule at my job. I go in at 2 in the morning and work until noon 4 days a week. I used to sleep in until about 7 o'clock on my days off, just because of how exhausting my schedule is. But recently, I found it easier to just wake up at my normal time at 1 o'clock in the morning every day of the week. It's not easy, but I get paid good money at my job, and waking up at the same time every day assures that I won't be exhausted all the time trying to balance my schedule out every week. I'm very disciplined about my health and my well-being, so I've always been a runner. I always try and get about 15 to 20 miles of running in every week. I've always preferred running outdoors rather than on a treadmill or some gym somewhere. But where I live, it can get a bit hot outside, so I always ran early in the morning or late at night. Ever since getting my job, I've went for my runs at 2 o'clock in the morning on my days off. I usually find it very relaxing. I love the emptiness of the streets at night. The atmosphere provokes a lot of deep thoughts within me, which always makes me run sort of easier. Now, I am a very tall and muscular man, so I've never been too terrified of running into some creep at night on my runs. I also used to take karate when I was in high school, so I always feel as if I can defend myself if a situation of sorts ever presented itself. Basically, if somebody ever tried to get tough with me, I'd be more scared for them than I would of myself. However, my self-confidence and courage recently disappeared after encountering whatever that thing was. It was during one of my runs. A couple of months ago, I was on the morning run. I was running the same route as I always do. I was about 2 miles into a 5-mile run, meaning I was 2 miles away from home. I always run on the outskirts of the giant park that borders the north side of my town. It's filled with trees and bushes and a lot of animals. So, with that being said, it isn't really uncommon to have some encounters with badgers or possums or birds at night. I've pretty much grown used to all of the weird noises I hear coming from the trees. However, this night was different. I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary while running along the path next to the park, but I got this deep, dreadful feeling in my stomach. I'd never felt anything like it before. Fear arose within me. I had no idea why. My sixth sense kicked in that night. I didn't know what I was feeling or even thinking. I just knew I had to get out of there as fast as I could. My jog turned into a run, which then turned into a sprint. My senses knew I was being followed by someone or something. I felt the leaves crumbling at my feet with each step I took. I didn't even think about where I was running or where I was heading as long as I got out of there. I wanted to look behind me just to know if I was actually running from something or if I was just being paranoid. My body just wouldn't let me look. I was too afraid to know the truth. The dread and fear only began to grow within me. Even after running for a good couple of minutes, I still didn't feel safe. Suddenly, I found myself trying to shout and yell for help, but I just couldn't. I couldn't even make a sound. I was hardly even breathing. My vocals were drowning in just despair. I was about out of breath at this point, so I made the mistake of turning around in hopes of to find myself alone. As I turned around, my foot kicked into a rock sticking out of the ground. I fell to my face. In fear, I looked behind me. In fear, I stood up and prepared myself for whatever came my way. My flight reactions were about to turn into fight reactions. I clenched my fists, I stood up straight, making myself appear as threatening as I could be. Surprisingly, I found myself alone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Nothing. Why would I be so afraid of nothing? What was I running from? Was I that paranoid? I had a hard time just believing that. This couldn't all be my imagination. But that's what my eyes were saying, because no one was there. Nothing was there. I felt relief, and I began to slow walk home, just to catch my breath. I was farther from home now than I was before. The only way back home from where I was back on that path next to the park where I just came from. I decided this time to walk directly through the park to avoid the same path I was just on. I soon regretted this decision. I had never walked through the park at night before, so I had no idea that there were no lights on the paths. It was pitch black, the darkest black I'd ever seen all around. I couldn't turn back now, though. I had to get home. I wanted to put all this behind me. I kept putting one foot in front of the other and only looked forward. As long as I felt the pavement below me, I knew I was going in the right direction. Suddenly, I felt my stomach drop yet again. That same feeling and the same fear was growing within me. This wasn't the exact same, though. I knew I was in real danger, and it wasn't just paranoia this time, because this time I saw something. I saw something in this pitch darkness, the darkest black I had ever seen. I saw something. How? I didn't know. I saw this figure, and it was moving in front of me. It was darker than black. The deepest, darkest thing I'd ever seen in my life was moving toward me on the path I was walking on. This time I didn't fight. I didn't run. I froze. I was dead in my tracks. I just froze. I couldn't make myself move. I tried, but I was paralyzed. I had to watch the darkness of whatever this was approach me. The dark black of this being grew closer and closer until everything was darker than black around me. I felt immersed into the darkness. I opened my mouth to make a sound, and this time I actually could. I let out a fearful cry, closed my eyes, and felt nothing. I can't explain this feeling. I just felt nothing. I honestly thought I was dead. The sounds of birds chirping slowly started to fade in. Too afraid to open my eyes, I continued to listen to the chirping birds. In the distance, I could even hear the voices of people. I felt a soft breeze touching my nose, and I finally worked up the courage to open my eyes. It was daytime. The morning dew covered me. I was laying in the park on the path right where I was attacked. But how could it be morning already? A few seconds ago, it was just the darkness of these woods, and now it's daylight. I felt exhausted and confused, and I headed for home without question. I'm still confused about this experience to this day. I've never slept, or, well, rather sleepwalked in my life, and at least that I know of. I just can't explain what happened to me, but it's safe to say that I don't run at 2 o'clock in the morning anymore. Paranormal events in my old family home. So when I was a kid, we came home from school early. It was due to a town-wide power outage. So it comes around to dinner time and the power still doesn't come back on. I need to set the scene for this part. So the way the house was laid out is you'd come into the main floor, and a few feet in were some stairs going downstairs where my room, the bathroom, the living room, and the door to the basement would be. With that said, my family was going to go eat and everybody went out to the car, except for me. I stayed inside to go to the bathroom. I'm going to the bathroom and all of a sudden I hear a door open and slam shut. Then it stomps across the floor, then a door opens and slams shut again. It sounded like it was on my level. I go out to the car and ask my parents if they were in the house, and they say no, everybody's been out of the car waiting for me. So fast forward about 6 or 7 years. I'm at the house, I go to the basement to grab something. And I swear to this day I could have sworn my dog came downstairs to the basement with me. He's a big 90-pound black lab. So I turn to go upstairs, then I turn off the light and look down the stairs into the dark basement. There's a light on behind me, and in this little bit of light, I see a pair of green eyes. They're looking at me. Almost like you shined a light off a dog or a cat's eyes with a flashlight. I tell him to come up like 2 or 3 times, and he doesn't, so I just close the door and figure, okay. He'll bark at the door for me to let him up in a second. But no, he won't, and I just go to the main floor. He's lying there on the couch, sound asleep. Fast forward another 3 years. My youngest brother is 3. When my mom would tuck him in, he would ask my mom if he would tuck in, quotes, the girls. My mom would be confused because there's only my sister and she's 18. He would say no, the little girls. They wanted to be tucked in too. This would freak out my mom. I bet. My childhood home left many horrifying memories that I'll never forget. This happened years ago, but I remember everything clearly, and every time I think or talk about it, the feelings come back. When I was 8, my mom and stepdad moved us to a country home. I have 2 younger siblings as well, so there were 5 of us who lived there. This house was always a little bit creepy, but it held so much more than just a creepy feeling. I've been able to see things from a very young age. I don't really talk much about it because honestly, you always get mixed feelings, so I avoid it. Anyway, when we first moved in, I kept seeing a little boy. He was always in my little brother's room or the kitchen, and he cried, like all the time. I was 8, so I didn't really know why. But I always tried to ask what was wrong, and he didn't talk back. Kept telling my mom that a little boy in the kitchen kept waking me up at night, but she would never believe me. For a few years, it was just the little boy. But that all changed very, very quickly. Right before my mom and stepdad divorced, they fought all the time. The environment in the house definitely felt hostile. And then he moved out, and things went downhill fast. At first, it was just a few extras I'd see at night, usually roaming our L-shaped hallway. Then weird things started happening. I've never been a great sleeper, so I'd always be pretty much woken up at night. I'd watch my door open and close by itself. I'd hear banging all throughout the hallway. When I had to go do laundry in the back room that also housed the entrance to the basement, I'd instantly get a heavy feeling. So I went down one time and I got to the second step from the bottom. I took a look around and I saw people chained to the walls staring at me. I literally ran so fast. I cried and I tried to tell my mom, but she told me I was just lying. I wasn't lying. She started to believe me after she had her scary encounter, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share that here. But if I can, I'd be more than happy to post. Anyway, things kept progressing. We couldn't keep a light bulb in the light in the dining room because as soon as we'd change it, the bulb would literally explode. Every time, it would leave shards of glass all over the floor. I watched a kitchen chair fly across the room. It slammed hard against the wall and it left a hole there. We had a lamp in the living room that fell over every single night at the same time. So, towards the end of living there, we slept in the living room with the fireplace on. That was because my mom couldn't afford propane. We had a blanket over the doorway, and when it was open because somebody went to the bathroom, I'd see a lady in white pace the dining room floor. She said one sentence, and I'll never forget it. "He's coming." She'd repeat it until she would disappear. My theory is that she was giving us a warning about the demon that paid us a visit every night. He was evil. He was definitely set on making us leave or hurting us. He made his presence well known. Tormenting us was his favorite. We always went down the long hallways in pairs after things started getting bad. The one time I didn't take somebody, I ended up with scratch marks. Nothing followed us when we moved, though, which is amazing, but I'm very thankful for it. Only one person has lived in that house since we left years ago. He lasted 6 months before he called it quits. Stands empty now at the end of a long driveway. I've been back once and it wasn't a pleasant experience. The house is starting to cave in. I'm sure the farmer will tear it down and connect all of his fields finally. I do have one piece of information that I'd love to share about. When I did research, I found out the ground the house stood on was at some point an Indian burial ground. Later, the point or the hill became home to a courthouse for a little town. And they did in fact use the basement as a jail, and they did chain people to the walls. The town died out and a family bought the ground, tearing down the courthouse and building a house over the basement. The house burned down, killing the family, which included a young boy. My friend's basement is haunted. My friends Sparks and Frosty have a creepy basement. It's finished and nice, but when you go down there, the energy is very off. We hang out in the basement every time to cruise together. We usually just ignore the energy and continue about our day. One day I went up to use the bathroom. My friends Sparks and Frosty decided to pull a joke on me. They snuck upstairs and went out to the backyard. That's where the shed is. They hid inside of it. They didn't set anything up in the basement, they just hid from me to scare me. So I returned to the basement to, hear giggling from the storage closet. It sounded like them. I called them out and I heard, "Shh, hush, she's right there." I called out to them again, saying it wasn't funny. That's when I could hear them. I swung open the door to find, drumroll, nobody. What the hell? There was nothing, no phone playing a recording or something set up to prank me. Absolutely nothing. I felt the color drain from my face. I ran upstairs in a panic and I saw them opening the shed. I told them everything and they looked confused. But they were out here the whole time. And they showed me that they had their phones with them and they weren't messing with me. So every time I'm alone in their basement, I hear that same giggling coming from the closet. Nobody else hears it. The Victorian lady I saw floating in my grandparents' house. Long-time lurker here. Figured it was time to finally put down some of my own experiences into words. I personally really dislike low-effort posts and descriptions of people's personal paranormal experiences, so I'll try to do my best to be as detailed as possible. For a bit of context about me, I'm a 36-year-old male. I live near Atlanta and I'm married and, truthfully, live a pretty boring life. I'm a former Navy, former law enforcement, and currently have a bachelor's in mechanical engineering. I'm also a huge gamer and a PC nerd. I haven't been religious since I was maybe 8, and when people ask what I believe in, I simply reply, I believe in science, and I leave it at that. There is another side of me that listens to Alan Watts' Chill Step at night and ponder the deeper questions of reality and our universe. But in most day-to-day situations, I'm very logical and usually try to debunk things first. But when logic and science cannot explain some things that happen, that's when you start to really question everything. One of my earliest core memories I have, from maybe 4 years old in 1990, was the ghost I saw in my grandparents' house in Florida. I remember my mom sitting on the couch in the living room talking with both of them. And so I ran off through the house to explore, instead of listening to the grown-up talk. There was a dividing wall that separated the living room, where they were, from another room. My grandparents call that room the den. It was used for social visits when they would host guests. I was in the back alley of the house, peeking into the den around the doorframe from the hallway. As I'm peeking around the doorframe into the den, it's a long rectangular-shaped room with just a blank white wall on the left, a row of curtained windows on the long right wall. Mind you, it's broad daylight and a sunny spring day, so there was a lot of bright ambient light coming in from the windows. I'll never forget what I saw until the day I die. This old, wrinkly lady, Victorian-style dress, floating in midair in the middle of the room. She was maybe 10, 15 feet from me, floating about a foot off the ground, looking at the wall. I was looking at her left side, and I'm not an artist and I can't draw to save my life, but this image is so clear in my mind, like I wish I could paint it or draw it. Her dress was blue with frizzy lace around the wrists and neck area being white. She had silver gray hair pulled back into a bun behind her head. She was also translucent, so I could see her, but I could also see through her. There was a dining room table and about 6 wooden chairs behind her that I could see through her, too, if you know what I mean. I could also not see her feet, just the bottom of her dress as it waved slightly in a very ethereal way about a foot off the ground. She turned her head to the left and looked directly at me, which I actually don't remember scaring me at the time. Then turned her head back to the front, then looked upward and kind of evaporated upwards toward the ceiling, disappeared. That is the clearest memory I have of my entire brain, even more so than other core memories from that young age range. It's crystal clear in my mind's eye. We found out later that my grandfather had originally bought the house from an old woman whose wife had died in the house. He was too old to keep up the land anymore, so we think maybe I saw her. We're not really sure. We also really realized later on that if not for that left wall being there, the one the lady was looking at, she would have been looking directly at the back of my mom's head. Like, if not for that wall being there, she was actually watching the 3 of them talk. That makes sense. Kinda creepy. I've actually had many other unexplainable experiences in my life that I could post about if anybody cares. From living in a haunted apartment literally 10 feet away from a graveyard to having all kinds of crazy shit happen in our current house after we had my 20-year-old cat put to sleep. I also have a lot of other stories from family members and coworkers, including one where my mom and stepdad both saw my dead cousin, same time. I could write a lot more, but this one's getting a bit long-winded. Let me know if there's any desire to hear about any of the other stuff. I'll see about maybe sitting down and getting it all out. Gotta say, sir, if you've had that many and that vivid of an experience, seems strange that you would just say, I believe in science. However, you also could never disprove that. Tiffany the Mannequin. So 4 of my friends are rooming in a student housing apartment. They've been experiencing weird occurrences since they moved in with a mannequin named Tiffany. We're pretty sure Tiffany is from a Sears at a mall, but not quite sure. They lived in the same place last year without Tiffany and nothing weird happened. So far this year, they've had varying experiences that make no sense whatsoever. So here's what's happened so far. The door shutting on its own with no windows open and all roommates accounted for with the roommate living in that room gone. One person's LED lights changed colors on their own, and nobody else had the remote. It could be caused by another remote, but they don't have any other remotes. A different door shaking like somebody was trying to get in when the lights were turned off. The one in the room turned the lights on and the door stopped shaking. Then he turned them off and it started again, 3 times in total. The temperature is almost always 67 degrees, even if somebody changes the thermostat to 75. The night before, could be the building just having shitty heating, but there's no issues with the previous year. We put Tiffany, who's currently in a health ledger Joker getup, Heath Ledger Joker getup, in the center room facing the front door with the LED strobe lights on, 3 of us outside in the hallway looking at her and 1 person in the kitchen. While the 3 of us were out in the hall, the one in the kitchen starts yelling to stop. We turn the strobe lights off and turn the kitchen lights on. The one who yelled says that his back got scratched. So we checked to see if he was just messing with us, only to find 4 scratch marks across his back. The first occurrence, that I was there to witness. All of these events happened in different rooms in the apartment, and we're all very confused and shook by these occurrences. We don't know how to explain it other than something paranormal. If anybody has any opinions or suggestions, we're all very curious. Are people who experienced paranormal events as a child more susceptible to them? I should start by saying that I'm a believer in the paranormal and always have been, but I do fully understand why people would be skeptics. I've had paranormal experiences all my life. I lived in a house with ghosts from being born, basically. I used to have night terrors so bad that my mom would call 911. We saw so many things in that house. Most, I believe, was residual. Everybody knew the house was haunted. My mom had priests out to bless the house, and I think that made it worse. But no one acknowledged or admitted it was haunted till we moved out when I was 11. I walked in to view the next house and remember saying to my mom, "Mom, there's nothing here, it's empty." I was talking about the feeling. I knew it wasn't haunted. The real estate guy thought I was nuts, mind you. But I was right. Not a single person ever experienced anything there. Next, we moved to a former bungalow. I instantly knew it wasn't right. There was so much heaviness in the air, and we moved anyway, struggling financially. And again, I was right. Everybody experienced paranormal things. Nosies, things being moved, tapping that would move. Nosies, that's what they wrote. I'm sure they meant noises. Things being moved, tapping, and, a girl. She would be seen at the top of the stairs or walking across the front door. We lived here for around 6 years before things got better and moved out. The next house is the current house, and definitely something here. Something nice. It makes its presence known every now and then, but it's fine. I honestly believe, scrap that, I know my granddad's here. He passed in the second house and he's always been with me, but it's been more obvious since my granny moved in. There's many occasions as to why I know he's here, but I won't go into that now as it would be too long. I should also state that I'm a 24-year-old female. This shit's been happening a while. My boyfriend didn't believe in ghosts till he had been together a bit, and then he had an experience that made him a firm believer. Probably the scariest one in the house. I'd love to sit and write out all my experiences down in a book, but I've never gotten around to it. My main question is, do you think people who experience the paranormal as a baby or young child are more susceptible for life? My mom did get told by a psychic when I was younger that I had a gift. How true that is, who's to know? Never really looked into the probability of it, just what's happened to me has happened. I'm happy for the experiences in a way. Let me know what you guys think. You got a good attitude about it. Poochie the Haunted Pooch. For those of you that are 90s babies, you may remember the huge Furby boom. and just as popular but slightly less known in my area, Poochie. This was a robotic dog toy that sang little tunes when you pushed the right button on the head or placed his bone by his nose to activate him. So this was basically back when Harry Potter 1 first came out. My mom used to read a chapter at night to me, pretty much every night. And on one of those nights, at around 8 p.m., we suddenly hear one of the tunes coming from my room. Weird, but I had that toy for a bit. Maybe it was faulty wiring. After a few nights of it activating on its own at around the same time, it stopped working when I intentionally tried to play with it. About a week more of this goes by and I get irritated and just take out the batteries. Silence for about 2 weeks. And then, one night at around 10 p.m., the sing-song tune begins once more. No batteries, no prompt from me. Began to feel afraid and weird about it. This led me to throwing it hard against a wall, popping its head slightly out and breaking a leg. I thought that was that. I loved it too much to get rid of it, but didn't want it turning on anymore. So, except that wasn't it. It continued to turn on every night, around the same time. I took to burying it at the bottom of my toy box, under plushies to quiet the noise. But every morning it would reappear in my shelf. I was afraid, I was so scared I decided to just throw it out. I threw it out 5 times, in fact. It kept appearing back in my room, with both the maid and my parents denying having taken it out of the trash. One day, without me really noticing when it happened, it disappeared. I never saw it again. The Shadow Killers. So for a bit of background, I grew up in a town 30 minutes outside of Cancun, Mexico. Shopping had to be done in the city, so I had a babysitter pretty often. The house had a long, narrow corridor from the front yard to the backyard. It was along the side of the house where the kitchen and living room were. Now that we have the setting, my mom had to go grocery shopping, leaving me in the hands of a teenage girl from our area. Now, I admit I was a kid and time perception is way off for kids. But I do remember my mom hadn't been gone for long when I terrorized this girl enough that she decided to leave me alone and go home. I was very satisfied with myself at first. What didn't feel like too much time later, when I'm in my room, I hear a whispering voice. Assuming it's the babysitter back, thinking that she had scared me by leaving, I went to try to run her off again. And yes, I was a huge asshole kid. But as I walk toward the living room, I see a shadow by the window where the corridor was. My blood turned cold. I remember terror. I remember fear greater than I've ever had before. Suddenly the voice became 2 voices, then 3, and the shadows multiplied. They were tall, solid black, and human-shaped. And as the shadows began to get more solid-looking, the voices also became louder. They were saying words such as kill, alone, and murder. In my terror, I called my best friend's mom, the only number aside from our own I'd memorized. I told her I was scared and somebody was there at the house. She rushed over to pick me up and arrived at the same time my mom did. Now, to me, it felt like no more than an hour, max 2, had gone by. But consider a 30-minute drive each way, plus my mom usually 2 to 3 hours hitting the 3 major stores for a shopping day. Time doesn't add up. But those shadows, those solid, black, scary shadows, they dissipated as soon as my mom showed up. La Santa Muerte does not want to be ignored. It was around the year of 2011. My parents had moved back to the U.S. I hated my first rental house. So my then boyfriend and I decided to look for other places closer to the main city. A friend we had in common, and also the reason that he and I even met, told us that she had a house for rent. and apparently we could rent it for very cheap. Now, despite all my past weird and inexplicable experiences, I was still very much a skeptic. Paranormal? Bah. We knew she and her family very much believed and prayed to their saint La Santa Muerte. To not make this an even longer story than it already will be, I recommend looking her up on Google if you don't know who she is. Suffice it to say, she's often revered perhaps, by those wishing for money and harm on their enemies. On to my story with her. A little description of the house. As you walk in the front door, on the left is a living room. Straight ahead is a corridor that holds the kitchen and a back door to the closed-in and mostly roofed yard. If you stand at the front door and look down the corridor, you can see through a window at the end of the kitchen. This looks into a small laundry room that's attached. The main bedroom was upstairs, a guest bedroom next to the corridor and below the upstairs bathroom. Now the scene is set. The heavy curtains were always drawn. No one was in that house, but we always felt watched. We lived there for around 2 months when things started getting very weird. My pets began acting odd. My parrot died, and within hours was into heavy decomposition. My 10-year-old dog with cataracts and minor hip dysplasia acted like she could see and had no pain in her joints, but she wouldn't stand in the sunlight. And so, my first weird moment was getting home from work every day, feeling like I was going to find another pet dead. I got home feeling something was off. Quietly walked to the back door to peek my head out. Molly, the old dog, was laying unmoving by the door. No breath, no anything. I watched her for a few minutes, and eventually, when I decided it was time to move her, as she was clearly dead, I made a noise and watched as her chest area instantly expanded and she began to breathe. A few days later, while I was at work, my boyfriend called me to tell me the dogs got into a fight. Junior had blood all over his neck from where Molly tore through him. He needed to go, so please hurry home. When I got there to check on them, sure enough, Junior had blood all over his neck without a single wound. Molly had no blood, but 2 deep punctures, one above the eye and one below her jaw. That night my husband and I sat down to talk. Something was weird. We would see a white veil and a face watch us through the laundry room. Pieces and corners of the tiled floor would go missing, like without a trace. In the guest bedroom, water would drip onto your shoulders or head, but none ever really would reach the floor. I told him I was afraid to feed my own pets. We agreed that he would take care of them for a bit. Only a few days later, on my way back upstairs from the kitchen, something strong tried to push me down them. Like, I managed to get upstairs and I told him what happened. And remember, even at this point, we were both still non-believers, technically. A day later, as we're laying in bed, he asks me if I noticed the ledge in the backyard area, with the picture frame and the candles. I informed him that there was a frame laid down and 2 candles also on their side, but I hadn't really thought much of it. He said the frame was standing at the center, with both candles positioned on each side upright. I asked what was in the picture. In his words, they weren't even fully out of his mouth. La Santa when the dirty clothes basket, which had a click on the top and a heavy pair of wet jeans laid over it to dry, scared me into believing. The top lifted up a few feet into the air. It flew sideways into the wall. I knew in that instant that we needed to leave. Now. So we prepared our things and went to stay with his sister. Turns out the reason our friends refused to visit was every time they walked in they felt something very off about the place. Apparently they hadn't wanted to tell us. The owner was very upset upon learning that we were leaving only 5 months into the contract. She said that she had forgotten that portrait and the candles, and she felt ignored and abandoned. She only wanted us to leave her flowers and money as tribute. We noped right out of there. My ex went back to pack up, fell asleep on the bed, and was slapped awake by nothing there. After we moved, only a week after the dogfight, suddenly Molly's wounds were scars. She was back to being her normal old, not good sight or mobility self. And I will not, well, rather, I will never not believe in the paranormal again. The Tall Entity. After we finally got a new house rented, my boyfriend went back to his nightly gym routine. From his first night gone, around 7 o'clock at night, I noticed these flying ants, for lack of a better description, roughly half an inch long all over the house, a ridiculous amount. Naturally, I got up to investigate where they were all coming from. I noticed that they were coming in from a window unit, the AC in the living room wall. I turned it off, killed all the ones I could, and realized at around 8 p.m. they were gone. What I didn't realize until about 9-ish is that the dead ones were gone too. Disappeared into thin air. The next night again, at around 7, I hear a loud rattling noise coming from the living room. I jump up, worried one of the animals had messed with something, to see a metal chain on the ceiling fan swinging hard against the light dome. It was causing the rattling and the clanging noise. As soon as I walked into the room, I see ants shooting out of the AC once more. Again, I kill as many as possible, and again, by around 8 p.m., they disappear. We used to have boyfriends, niece and nephew stay with us a lot, at least every weekend. The ants and the clanging chain lasted about a week. Then they suddenly stopped. Now, we took the AC apart and never found any nest or anything. So where they come from, who knows? Anyway, one afternoon, a couple of days after the activity stopped, the nephew was lying on the sofa and asked to have been messing with one of the fan blades. When we look up, we see what looked like 3 fingers had been dragged across it. Ignoring it, thinking it was there before we moved in and we just hadn't noticed, I cleaned the blades the next day. This fan was too high for even my 5'10" height to reach without a stepladder. I lived there for around a year. The only other thing that happened was a month or so later, as dust had accumulated once more on the fan, 3 marks reappeared on one of those blades. The day after, for the last time, the chain was made to swing hard enough to hit the light dome. I call this tall entity, I guess, because whatever caused the marks had to have been at least 6'5" to be able to reach up there toward those blades. Now, I know this isn't the scariest of stories. It's not even the scariest that's happened to me. But I did want to document these things in order as they happen. There's a few pieces of crucial pieces of information, rather, that you sort of left out here. You're concerned about these ants. I don't know what part of the world you live in, but if you live in the eastern part of the world, there's a lot of this. They can come up through drains, through windows, and they're maybe 1.5 inches long, and there'll be thousands of them. I have endless stories of some things like that. And the fun thing is you'll see thousands of them. They'll all have these wings, and you'll think, oh, they're just everywhere. You can't do anything about it. You can't fight it. So you go to sleep, and you wake up, and then all of a sudden, all of the ants and just wind up being gone. Because apparently their wings fall off, and they just there's just piles of wings all over the floor everywhere, like you could sweep them up, amount of wings. Point is, other bugs come and grab those wings and bug recycle them. So out of the 2 things that you were saying, one of them being the ants, I haven't heard very many bug-related paranormal things. But I've had too many of bug-related things not to just simply relate to what you're doing there. So I might disregard the bug thing. Secondly, I don't know how much you've cleaned in your life, but the dust is pretty interesting, and it's affected by magnetism. So I don't really know much about your fan, but I do know, because I've had some, is that dust will accumulate in certain spots in a fan. So if there's some magnetic piece of material somewhere on it, the dust won't want to settle there. Or if there was some sort of a film or a residue on that surface, it'll collect on the more porous and easy to adhere part of the blade. But it could be ghosts, because those are a thing too. But when there's bug stuff and technical stuff, I'm going to say something, especially since it's all the way at the end of the stories, and very few people are hearing me ramble on about this anyway. But don't yell at me. Next story. Is there a spirit in my house? I'm not really too religious, but I do believe in spirits and ghosts. I've always felt like being followed and watched since I was about 9 years old. Also saw shadowy figures in the corner of my eye a lot. But it's recently been attributed to mild psychosis I have due to lack of sleep, and that's due to chronic insomnia. I've also had consistent panic attacks since the same age. That has also been attributed to anxiety. But despite being on medication, I only seem to be getting a little bit better. I know that medication takes a while to work, but I usually just accepted that. However, recently, my friend and I were playing with a dartboard. I've had it for a while. Never really used it until she came over, though. Her and I started to ask it yes or no questions about her future as a joke. A dartboard? Okay. After she left, I continued asking it because I was having fun. After a while, I started getting a weird feeling around it, like as if something was actually guiding the darts to hit or miss the board. Your hand. And then I started to ask it religious questions, such as, is God real or does hell exist? It seemed to answer yes to the question that glorified the devil and no to the question that glorified God. I then asked if there was a spirit, which it replied yes. I also asked it some yes or no questions that, well, I was sure I would know the answer to, and all of them were answered correctly. This started a few days ago, and ever since I kept thinking about it and kept getting the urge to ask it more questions. My friend, who only asked a few questions once and not really since, said that she couldn't get the board out of her mind either. Today I was doing something on my computer. That's when my light started flickering. My computer and the other plugged-in devices were unaffected. It was just my lights. Something in me said I should ask the board if it had something to do with the lights. So I did, and it replied yes. As I talked to it, my lights became stable. Once I noticed, I asked the board if it wanted me to leave it alone, or at least for now. It said yes, and my lights stayed stable. My lights have never done this before. It may all be a coincidence, but my dartboard is like magnetic felt. I used both magnetic darts that I knew had very strong magnets and Velcro-covered balls that stick to all the fabric that I tried it on, including felt. Yet when I asked it a question that I knew the answer was no, the darts seemed to lose magnetism when they hit and the balls didn't stick. When I asked it a question I knew was yes, the darts and balls stuck. Whenever I approach it, it suddenly gets an intense feeling of fear that goes away when I'm farther away from it. Is it possible that this is a paranormal thing in some way? I'm in no way an expert in this area, so if I'm overreacting, please let me know. On a sunny summer day in England, 20 years ago, I was sat in my friend's bedroom in the new house his family had just built on the side of an old barn. We had the windows open, and a soft breeze and the distant sound of people in the park were drifting through. We were watching movies, eating snacks, having a lazy summer holiday afternoon. There's nothing eerie or scary about any of it. No scary films, no talk of anything of the sort. In between films, my friend got up to replenish the snacks. That was while I was changing the disc. He called my name from the door, and as I was turning to answer, I felt the distinct, unmistakable sensation of an ice-cold hand tightening on my neck. I dropped the DVD case as my hands instinctively flew up to my throat to pull this hand away. But of course, there was nothing there. It had completely restricted my breathing. I couldn't take a breath. My friend ran over in a panic and led me to the sofa to sit down while I gasped for air, utterly terrified. He kept saying, just breathe, while he fumbled for his phone and started dialing 999. Then on one of the just breathes, I was suddenly able to just take a breath. It probably lasted less than a minute, but I broke down shaking and crying. It's the only unexplainable thing that's ever happened to me. I've always been enthralled by ghost stories and tales of the unexplained, but this is my only real-life experience. I have no medical conditions or allergies. Nothing that's developed in the 2 decades since this has happened. Nothing that could explain what caused this freak accident, but when I asked my friend about it years later, he said it looked like a ghost walked through me. Not that he saw a ghost, but the terror on my face and how I turned sheet white and frozen. Kids in the woods. When I was around 12 years old, I was at my cousin's house for a party. I'm pretty sure it was around Christmas time. We were hanging out in their backyard in the woods, and part of their backyard is like a wooded area. We came to this tree that used to have a treehouse in it. All that's left of that treehouse is some steps leading to it and a few platforms. Not safe to get up if you can even at all. My cousin, an 8-year-old male at the time, told us this story. A story about the kids who had that treehouse and how it died when it collapsed. I personally thought this was a bunch of BS, but I kind of went with it. We eventually headed back to the house, but I decided to go back into the woods alone. As I was walking to the woods, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Like I was safe there, safer than anywhere else. As I'm walking, I'm looking around and I see a light blue and white checkered flag up in a super thin tree that I didn't notice before. As I'm looking at this and trying to figure out how it got there, I started to hear kids' voices, laughing, talking, just having fun. I didn't think much of it at the time as my cousins were out in the treehouse, a new one that they built, not the old rundown one. As I'm walking closer to the old treehouse, the voices seemed louder. I looked back up at the flag. It was moving despite there not being any wind. I shook it off as I couldn't feel the wind from down here, but there was wind and looked back down. That's when I saw them. 6 children with white skin, like snow-white skin. Like there was no snow on the ground, by the way, either, so very white. They all seemed to be wearing winter gear, although it looked dull and dirty. They were walking toward me, but I didn't run. I wasn't afraid for some reason. I heard a branch snap, and that's when I did run. As I went back toward my cousin's house, I was surprised to see that they weren't outside. I found them in the living room playing video games, and when I asked them when they came in, they said, "When you were walking to the woods, why?" The kids I heard weren't them. Still don't know to this day who those kids were. They weren't other neighbor kids, as none of them lived too close to the cousins. Were they a figment of my imagination? Whatever it was, it's one of the reasons I believe. I moved into a house a year ago with my parents. One of the previous owners still lives here. On December 12th of last year, me and my family moved into a new house. I was between my first and second semester of college when we moved, so I decided to take up a part-time position at a Christmas tree farm to get some extra cheese for the holiday. That pretty much meant that I was never home. After a few days of actually living there, something started happening. Now, I'm a lazy bastard. I didn't unpack for like another 2 months. In fact, I still have a box of 2 clothes and other shit that I just haven't touched. But anyways, there were about a dozen boxes of various things sat inside my room. After a shift at the farm one night, I went to a buddy's house and spent the night. I didn't get home till 2 p.m. the next day, so I was out of the house for some time over 24 hours. My mom was home alone decorating the living room. That's when she started hearing boxes being thrown in the bedroom. In my bedroom. She assumed I was finally unpacking, so she didn't think much of it. The throwing became more and more aggressive as time went by, so she eventually busted into my room to figure out what my malfunction was. Except all of the boxes where I left them. The room was empty. It was weird. But it got weirder when my mom remembered that the guy who lived here several years ago hid his off switch in the house on Christmas Eve. We had to do a lot of work on the home before we moved in, so it had been almost 2 months before we actually moved in, which is why it slipped my mother's mind that the guy had died. I think his name was either Billy or Bobby. Something you name your kid that sounds good on a kid. I'm pretty sure every parent thinks it's the name that they pick, but yeah. Anyways, turns out that he offered himself... Anyway, turns out he offered himself in my bedroom. I believe what they meant was that he offed himself in his bedroom. It didn't bother me really, and figured if he's gonna haunt me, it's cool as long as he sticks to throwing boxes and doesn't actually mess with me. A day or 2 passes and I'm in my bedroom unpacking. That's when I hear this loud crash and glass shattering. So I run downstairs and I see what happened. I make sure that everyone's okay and I see my parents just sitting on the couch. I ask what happened and my mom just sort of gestures to the floor and said the clock fell. I looked and sure enough, the clock that we had that was on the wall had fallen off and broke. She said not to worry about it and that she'd clean it up in a minute. At first glance, I thought that the screw I had planted into the wall was maybe stripped out, but that didn't sit right with me. So I checked it out and the screw was still in the damn wall. I had to plant it into a stud in the wall with a daily long screw, so it didn't pry itself out. This clock is stupid heavy. It was a big decorative piece of metal and a place that's you hang it's one of those little keyhole things on the back. So you have to slide it over the screw or the nail to prevent it from falling. This clock definitely couldn't have fallen off the wall on its own, but my folks said that it had. The last encounter I personally had, it was definitely lackluster in comparison to the others. I was home alone and my dog was following me around just to steal my sandwich. She's a 3-pound toy Yorkie poo, and despite giving everyone in the house grief for wanting his tiny dog, I like her enough to spoil her when nobody's looking. So I bent down to give her a little scrap of turkey. That's when she started freaking the fuck out. While I'm trying to calm her down, I hear this tapping on the stove. We have a cookie jar that we sort of recycle to use with our cookware container. It sits between 2 of the eyes of the stove. I look at it, and it's gently rattling. I figured it was just something that happened in the house, but maybe it's something that I hadn't caught, like perhaps the AC kicking on and shaking a little bit or something. It just didn't bother me at first. That was till it started getting more and more aggressive, till I thought the jar was going to explode or some shit. But before it could, everything went silent. No rattles, no barking. I even realized I'd started holding my own breath. The next day was Christmas Eve, so I was expecting the house to implode, but it didn't. Nothing happened in the house after that. Well, until early this morning, which reminded me of all this shit. Nothing big happened, but I got off my shift at around 11. I went to bed at around 1. I was asleep for maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours when my dog started flipping shit in the hallway. I get up, I look out of the hallway, and I don't see shit. My younger brother just wakes and peeks out at me and he asks what's going on. We have had some issues with trespassing before, so I got very defensive of the house. I sent my brother back to his room so I could take a look. I flip on the hallway light and there's nothing there, but my dog's still fucking panicking. She's panicking like her life is about to end. My parents' room is downstairs in the basement, so I don't really catch wind of this till the next time I tell them. I start to panic and I'm flipping on every light in every room searching for anybody there. And all of a sudden she stops barking. No calming down, just ceases. That reminded me of the cookie jar, and I was relieved for about 2 seconds because I knew, well, oh my god, nobody was really in the house. But I didn't like the idea of this old dude lingering around again, now that it's getting closer to Christmas. We can probably all agree the only old man we want lingering around during Christmas has a beard and has a thing for chimneys. My first-hand ghost experience. This all begins about 19 years ago. The house that my parents first moved into was originally an old church, but it was remodeled into being a house. Not much of the old church was left in the house, minus the wood flooring in the den. Now apparently, my parents had heard choir music, the sounds of boots on hardwood floors, and I'd even seen a shadow figure once. But as for what happened to me, my parents were trying to move me from sleeping in their bedroom to my own. But for some reason I just wouldn't do it. My only reason being was I was scared to. So my mom asked me, "Why are you so scared to sleep in your own room? Do you need a nightlight maybe?" And apparently I said, and I quote, "Because of the tall dark man in the corner over there." Then apparently I pointed over to a corner of my room where, surprise, surprise, no one was. A few other things happened in that house, but none to me personally. If there's interest, I can make a separate post on it. Fast forward a few years and we're at our second house. And this is where shit starts to get crazy. I feel like I should preface by saying that there's a room in my house. We'll just call it the den. Since day one of being in this house, I never liked that room. I felt like I was being watched every time I was alone in there. So I did everything in my power to stay out of that room. I still do even to this day. The first incident was when I was no older than 9, maybe 10. It was the last day of school for me and my little brother Mark. Me, my mom, and Mark were at our house. Mark realized that he's left the towel at school. Needed to go back to go get it. My mom then turns to me and said, "Are you okay at staying at the house for about 10 minutes while we go back up to the school and get it?" I said I was. The school was less than a mile from where we were at. A few minutes after they left, I'm sitting in the living room and I start to hear my mom and Mark talking from my mother's bathroom. Even though I'm completely home alone, I then hear them start to laugh. Then it stops and everything was quiet. A few minutes later, my mom and Mark walked back into the house. However, 10-year-old me didn't even bother to mention it for some reason. A few years ago, well, until the next incident, a few years go by. Now before we keep going, I need to explain 2 things to you, dear reader. First thing, I need to tell you that, personally, I'm very much a night owl. Staying up to 3 or 4 in the morning is nothing new to me. The second thing, in my house there's a hallway. At one end is the front door, at the other end is the back door. Now, this hallway has 4 doorways and entryways. The den, the office, and the kitchen. Then my parents' room. The kitchen has a bar, so you're able to see the whole living room and into my parents' room. If their door is open, at least. And then further up next to the front door is the den. This next part takes place a few months ago, around 2-ish at night. I'm standing in the kitchen, I'm washing dishes. As I'm doing so, I hear two things crystal fucking clear coming from the den down in the hallway. I hear an old man go, "Shh," followed by a little girl giggling. I freeze in the middle of what I'm doing. I'm the only person awake right now. I don't have a little sister, and both Mark and my dad are asleep. I am the only person awake. Now at this point I'm panicking on the inside. However, I'm trying to keep my composure on the outside. I turn off the water in the sink and I walk to my parents' bedroom. I then shake my dad awake and I say, "Is there anybody else in this house besides me, you and Mark?" He simply said, "No, there isn't," and just falls back asleep. Annoyed, I walked out of my parents' room and I'm immediately looking down the hallway. Right towards the den, there's nothing. Just like there should be. I sigh and I go back to doing dishes because ghost or no ghost, I still have chores that need to be done. The next night, again, same story. I'm doing dishes and now something to note. I had just stood up and my shorts slipped a bit and I pulled them back up. So now the front half of my shirt is pretty untucked. The back half of my shirt is tucked into my shorts. And as I'm washing dishes, I feel something grab the back of my shirt and pop it. Very similar to the way your mom would grab you and fix your shirt by popping and pulling it out of your pants and shorts. And surprise, surprise. That's just what the fucking ghost did. It untucked my shirt from the back of my shorts. I just simply ignored it and kept doing dishes. But again, inside, I'm extremely terrified. One other incident I forgot to mention. Next to the den, there's a room. We just simply call it the office, like I said above. There's a few things in this room. 2 recliners, the family computer, mini fridge, and most importantly of all, the router. Now again, it's about 1-ish at night and the Wi-Fi is being extremely slow for some reason. I groan, I get up, and I head into the office. Now again, the office and the den are right next to each other, so I never really like going to the office alone. Well, especially at night. But tonight I had to. So I go into the office, go to the router, press the reset button, and then sit down from one of the 2 recliners that we have in there while I'm waiting for the Wi-Fi to reset. Now, the office door is actually a twin set of doors. Both these doors open the same way, so there's a small gap in between them. And where does that small gap look into? Right into that damn den. So I'm sitting there and I can't shake this feeling that I'm being stared at. Like 2 eyes are looking at me and burrowing into my very soul. I shake my head and I try to ignore the feeling. After the Wi-Fi box resets, I head back to my room and lay down on my bed. And that's when I feel it, a red-hot burning pain on my hand. I look down at my hand and there's 3 red scratch marks on it. Fast forward a few months. Nothing happens. Just the same old feeling that you're being watched, wherever you go. Until one night the metaphorical dam finally burst. I'm heading to bed, and now this involves making sure the front and back door are both locked. So, first thing I check the front door. It's locked, so I walk down the hallway. I reach the back door and unlock it. I then turn around and I see half a person walking into my den. The lower half. It's cut off right at the waist. And now this person was completely see-through and sort of gray, like the ghost in the Harry Potter movies. So I stand there for a few seconds in pure disbelief at what I just saw. I then very quickly walk from my room, shut the door behind me, because everybody clearly knows that ghosts can't follow you into your room. The most recent incident was last month. This time I was not the only person awake. However, I was the only person in the house. My dad was out in the garage working, so I'm standing in the kitchen eating a sandwich. It's important to note as well that my parents' door was open in the story. So I look up from my food for a second, and I see it again. Half of a person standing in my parents' room. But this time is the top half. I look back down at my food, and it's only after about half of a second that my brain processed what the hell I just saw. I then quickly look back up and into my parents' room. There's nothing. No one was there. Now here we are in the present day. Nothing new has happened as of late, however the feeling of being watched at night grows stronger by the day. It's actually gotten to the point where I don't like to be out of the kitchen or anything at night. And also, before anybody asks, no, I'm not the only person who's experienced stuff. Both my parents and Mark have as well. And probably most of you. And me. See ya.